What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Manchester on the Out of Bounds Network. I'm sitting here with teammate, good friend, Colby Lange. How you doing, man?
I'm so good. How are you? I'm so glad to be here. It's great to see your face.
No, this is awesome, especially being that, we've been trying to do this for a very long time, and I haven't necessarily have had the time to make it work, and neither have you. And so to finally get on the podcast is pretty dope. So, anyways, for the listeners that don't know who you are, kind of give us a little backstory on who Colby Lange is. How do you find yourself in cycling? Because you kind of have a cool story.
Yeah, okay, well, Colby Lange, that's me. Real quick, just to step back once. It's not because Kroom didn't have time, it's because I'm very expensive to get on podcasts. And
Yeah,
it took a while before he could afford it.
I had to talk to like several different agents and agencies just to get even in contact with you again. So, but I'm glad we can make it work. I'm glad that my people, me, could talk to your people, which is like a staff of 50. So,
Yeah. It'll be the best 100 billion you ever spent. But yeah, anyway, I started off as an alpine skier. And so like I grew up in Vail, Colorado, which plenty of people know is like a great place to ski. That's what it's famous for. I went to a ski academy. My dad's a professional alpine ski coach, and he's worked for various national federations and private programs and on the World Cup and with Olympic and World Championship athletes. And so from the time I was little, I was hell bent on being a professional skier. And then
were you ever a
uh,
professional skier? Like in
uh,
technicality, or like because you know how like in cycling we call ourselves professional cyclists before we're ever actually professional cyclists.
yeah,
Um, like you were so young. I mean, I met you when you were like 17. So like, how
yeah.
would you
I
have
mean,
categorized yourself?
I could, yeah, I could say that. I mean, I had sponsors. That and basically I was super fortunate that I had enough support that ski racing didn't cost me anything, which is a
I
huge
think that's
step up
massive.
on,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a huge step up on the majority of people. And I was pretty good. At one point I was ranked second in the world for my age, and I was national champion, um, won a bunch of races. Like I was good, yeah, but I mean I wasn't making a living, that's for sure. And that's
Okay.
actually funny because I'll fast forward and it kind of explains the difference between the state of ski racing and cycling at the time, at least. But uh, yeah, fast forward, I always loved ski, or I always loved cycling. Would do it basically as much as I can, which ended up being like 2 or 3 months a year, a little bit in the spring, a little bit in the fall. But when I did that, I took it seriously and I trained hard, and uh, I tried to get the best out of myself because mostly just that's my personality. Um, and then typically I'd always be skiing in Europe during the summer,
Yeah.
Europe and New Zealand. This year, or it was 2015, the trip was pushed back a little bit. And so I was going to be in the US for US Junior Nationals for the first time ever. And it was a drivable distance away. It's in Tahoe. And we're like, oh yeah, like why not? Let's give it a crack. We'll go. Like, sounds kind of fun. Especially because I knew I liked cycling and kind of wanted to get more into it. Went there and actually won the time trial.
Oh wow.
And so I was really keen on, like, that kind of sparked a fire for me. Like, oh yeah, like this is something I want to explore. Like I want to try racing in Europe. Like maybe this is something I could do. Um,
How old were
and
you?
it never.
15, or was that in
Uh,
2015?
yeah, 2015. So I was 16 at the
16.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, 15, 16 actually. Um, it never quite worked out at first. And I was like, all right, like great, I'll be a skier. I still love ski racing. Sounds pretty sweet to me. And then later had the idea like, oh, maybe we could try the track, like velodrome. And I had no intentions of racing ever, but in my own, or particularly my dad's mind, he was the one that had the idea. But it'd be something fun, it'd be new, it'd be a way to stay on the bike, but something I can kind of explore without pressure, and it'd be interesting. And it would probably be better training for ski racing just because it's shorter, more explosive efforts, something like that. Um, Quickly, once I started doing that, I fell in love and also got noticed. Uh, got invited to a USA cycling camp. And this is where we'll compare the states of skiing and cycling at the time. But soon after that, within a few months after that original USA cycling camp, I had the opportunity to, as an 18-year-old, be paid to be a cyclist on the national team. Whereas that same year, I qualified for the national team in skiing, and I was going to have to pay 30 grand to be on the team.
Oh wow.
So quite the difference. At the end of the day, I was over skiing. I built a ton of animosity into it. It wasn't fun. I was either sort of relieved if I did well or pissed off if I didn't, but never actually really enjoying myself at the races. And so I would have made the decision to be a cyclist anyway, but as an 18-year-old, that pay difference also made the decision pretty simple at the time.
Yeah, no, that's actually kind of insane because one thing we bitch about in cycling is just the natural pay is so low. Like it's so low and so hard to get that money together and whatever else. And so um yeah, I can only imagine if I'm just like picturing Jim Miller coming to me and being like, hey man, you had a really great season, like I think we're gonna put this program together, and yeah, I'm gonna ask all the guys for $30,000. Like
Yeah, yeah.
that to me would be nuts.
Yeah, totally. Unfortunately, back then it was the norm in skiing. I think it's gotten better now. Unfortunately, I don't keep up with it as much as I should, especially details like that. But yeah, it's a tough world alpine skiing. I mean, so is cycling, but um, could always be worse, or it could be better, or you could be professional soccer players and get paid from the time we're 11. So I don't know
Yeah.
why we're don't know why we're messing around with this, but
Yeah, no, I always joke about it because it's like like now I have student loans and I have all these other things and like it's funny because like I feel like college, like I wouldn't be where I'm at today in cycling if it wasn't for college. But I also could be doing the same thing I'm doing now, like with the podcast, with marketing, with some of the work that I'm doing with no college education.
mm,
And so it's really funny to like think about student loans and all these other crazy things. Um, but anyways, to get off that, let's not even dive into payments and all these other things. Like you found early success in cycling and you found early success in skiing, and that transition kind of happened because you felt like, I guess, financials, right? Like I'm more or less just summarizing what you're saying. But do you ever see yourself, or do you ever wonder, where you could have been if you would have stayed in skiing?
uh, yeah. I mean, I actually don't have to wonder that much because I think I probably would have stopped eventually.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, do you think you would have stopped because you got burnt out, or do you think you would have stopped because you would have got priced out? Like, why do you think you would have stopped? Is kind of my question.
yeah. I mean, yeah, like I said, thankfully I was good enough to the point and had incredible support. Like I was also very well supported and super lucky for what I received as far as the opportunities I had to sort of make that dream come true. So I wouldn't have gotten priced out, but I think, like I said, I was really happy or content when I was actually racing. Don't get me wrong, like I still love the act of skiing, and the thought of training GS, which is one of the events, is like great to me, and I have dreams about like ripping ski turns and stuff.
Yeah.
But by the end, I was almost always miserable,
Yeah.
and I actually had a good year as well, and so that alone tells you something when you're succeeding and like reaching your goals and not having fun. Um,
Well,
but
like dive back a little bit too, because like you talk about, because like I still think you're like one of the wisest dudes I know. like, and you're probably one of also the youngest teammates that I've ever had. Like, you're like one of the wisest teammates I've ever had, but you're also one of the youngest teammates I've ever had. And so, like, some of the questions you have, like, I forget your age. Like, you'll ask me questions like when we're out, in Europe, or like when we were, you would ask for advice or something like that, relationship wise or whatever, right? And I would forget how young you were. So like dive back a little bit of like what school system that you were in, because you were like at a ski school. Like it wasn't like you were at your
Yeah.
normal high school in Vale, which I don't even know if they have those, very small town, but I assume they do. But you know what I mean? But like you were at like ski high school. Like where like
Yeah. Yeah. I went to a ski academy from the time I was in sixth grade. And so um, what that looks like is the whole idea is to cater to athletics, specifically in this case, alpine ski racing. There's also other sports at my school, like freestyle skiing and snowboarding and Nordic and stuff like
yeah.
that. So it was structured pretty much like a normal school in the fall. And then once November 1 came around and you could start skiing in Colorado, uh, our schedule shifted. So our school day didn't even start until after 1 o'clock. And so we trained every morning um, with like Vale Ski and Snowboard Club. And then went to school from 1 to 5 basically. And then along with that, they, like I said, they're trying to cater to athletics. And so like when we were going on competition trips, oftentimes they'd send tutors. They had a specific sort of late work policy. So like when you're gone for 3 or 4 weeks competing, you're not like failing out of school. And
Wow.
so they're keen to help you with stuff like that. But I actually think, and I appreciate, I am very wise, far wiser than anyone actually. Um, that if that's true, um, it would be because when I was growing up, I was lucky enough to spend a ton of time with my dad and his group of athletes. And so from the time I was 10 years old, uh, all my closest friends were like double and triple my age.
Yeah,
Just
that's kind of what I'm
because,
trying to get at. It's like,
yeah, yeah. And so that's one of the reasons why I think, uh, and this is a double-edged sword, but I like to see myself as, like a professional athlete. And what I mean, I don't mean like getting paid, I mean like how I go about it. Just because I was around uh, Olympic skiers and world champion medalist skiers all the time. And I saw what it took for them, and that like really inspired me. And I thought they were so cool. And then it's like having a group of like super rad older brothers. And so, yeah, that sort of shaped what I prioritized and what I thought was important in the world and what I thought was cool. Um, and so, yeah, basically, and then that was the same thing once I started cycling. I was 18 years old, and obviously Gavin at the time was, I guess, 2 years older than me, but then the next youngest would probably be you, and then it goes up
yeah.
to Hedge, who was nearly double my age at the time, and so
Yeah,
that's
which
continued. And
I would have said that you two are probably the most level and were probably the most wise on the team. Is it's kind of it's which is weird because it was almost like you would go to Hedge and Hedge would impart his wisdom, and then but there was times like in training sessions where we would all be all over shop and you would just say like, "Well, dude, we should just be doing it like X, Y, and Z."
mm,
And where I was just like, "Oh yeah, yeah, duh, Colby, he gets it, he's wise." And then you would come to me with
smart guy.
some problem or some situation, or I'd overhear some problem or some situation. I was like, "Oh shit, he's only like 20 years old, 19 years old." Like,
Yeah.
I just completely space on it. And so that being said, that finds you now in this program. You next person closest in age to you was Gavin, and then myself, and we go up the line, and like now we look at all these guys, and they're all above the age of 30. They've pretty much retired. Um, where did you find yourself after the team pursuit program?
Uh, yeah. Well, so I also really like the road, and So I was racing a little bit on the road at the beginning, and then uh, sort of the last year of the Team Pursuit program, I was racing for Wildlife Generation, um, a Conti team, and so that way, like I was getting to race in Asia and yeah, like start doing UCI races on the road. And that was awesome because that showed me that even though yeah, it wasn't as high of a level of competition as I was doing on the track, like it showed me like, oh, this is actually something you really like and something you want to do. And then in in July of 2019, had a super dumb crash and
I was
broke.
there.
Kroom was there. It's quite dramatic.
Yes, it was
Uh,
very dramatic. I'm still
but
traumatized.
I broke two vertebrae in my back, one in my neck, a bunch of stitches, and yeah, and so that basically ended my participation on the Team Pursuit team. And so the next year would have been 2020, and I was planning on focusing more on the road, especially with where that fell in the Olympic cycle. And I also wanted to develop that side of my cycling. I think it'd be good for my track as well. Um, Lo and behold, COVID came and we didn't race pretty much at all. and then I got super lucky, ended up on Hagen Sperman Action for the 2021 season, which
How did
uh,
that come about? Like, because I mean, you know, if I was Axel, and I'm just like, I don't know Axel, but like, I just see him, like, I would see his emails be like over flooded with kids like you and talent like you. Like, you're right on the cusp, and like, you can be something great. And he's got kids all over the world, right? You know, it's not even just the US. And so you break your back, and somehow he believes in the fact that you can bounce back from this at such a young
yeah,
age.
you know, I don't know how it ended up being me. I sent him an email in I don't know, probably May or something, just like lobbing a prayer. I didn't have any expectations of even a response, and sure enough, I did. Somehow he knew who I was. I think uh, when I was younger, we had also talked a little bit, and it wasn't the right time. But yeah, he was aware of who I was, and I think I had uh, some very strong references. Um, Jim Miller, for sure, I know was talking to him about me. But yeah, I don't know. I think I honestly don't know what tipped him off to be like, oh, he wants to uh, have me on the team. It helps I'm American,
Yeah,
but that actually, in hindsight, I wish I would have had a different mentality going into it. Because, like you're saying, especially, and I was aware of this, like, oh, how many emails does that guy get? Like, how many really good cyclists my age want to and are good enough and deserve to be on that team? And in my mind, like almost right away, I was like, oh, like, am I good enough to deserve to be on this team? Like,
for
how
sure.
did I even get on this team? I didn't even race last year. Like, no one did. But yeah, I didn't even race last year. Like, why me? Um, and so, well, in reality, uh, I think part of me believed that I was good enough. I think from, and this conversation will kind of lead to like who I am today. But I think with all the stress of the previous year of coronavirus, and then also sort of underlying demons that I had mentally, uh, pretty much soon after I had signed with Action, is when my mental health just absolutely deteriorated to like a fine sand.
Yeah.
And um, I was super lucky because Action was super understanding, and um, like they didn't push me on anything. They were I don't I'm missing the words right now, but like I'm so grateful for the support they showed, and they weren't expecting anything out of me, and they they weren't angry with me. They weren't disappointed, and they genuinely just wanted to help me back to health, let alone riding well. So that was great, but that didn't stop me from absolutely like blatantly just hating myself
Yeah.
and like participating in really self-destructive behaviors. Thankfully, not like drinking or drugs or stuff, but um, I I couldn't get out of bed. I was in training. I put on a ton of weight. Um, I wasn't ready to quit the sport, but I didn't see any other like way. There a lot of my misery was from myself just telling myself what a piece of garbage cyclist I was because I couldn't even get out to train.
Well,
And so
wait a minute. Like, how do you even get here? Like, I feel like, we've talked about this ski kid, right? Who, is super talented. I remember you coming into the program, and I remember coaches like walking around in the infield being like, this is the next kid. Like, this is the next Taylor Finney. I remember hearing those words be said. And I don't like comparing athletes to other people, but those were the words that were said. And you always smiled, you were always stoked, like you're always looking for the next thing. So like you finally made it here. You've made it to action. Like I think this is any kid's dream. And then you feel like the words that you said, you felt like your mental state almost turned into sand. Like how do you end up there?
yeah, well, in hindsight, there's a bit of a hint of this at the end of my ski career, but I certainly uh, battle with depression, and I also wasn't really aware of the extent of it and how much is affecting me and what normal was. But in hindsight, yeah, at least since I was 17 or 18, I've dealt with depression. And I think it's one super normal and super common. And a lot of people listening will uh, have similar experiences, regardless of if they feel like they're depressed or not. Um, but for me, it kind of was just waves of like fogginess and like really hard to actually like yourself. You feel like an imposter. um yeah, it's just basically, for me at least, I found every single way in the world to beat myself up. um I could tell you I had a laundry list of reasons why I was a piece of garbage. And that was the only thing I could think about, and it was just like this constant reel in my head. um there wasn't a moment during the day where I wasn't aware of what utter disgrace I was to this planet. And I could see logically that that wasn't true, and I could see that things in reality were like great. Like I had a great situation, but that almost made it worse. The fact that it was in quotations only in my head. like
Yeah.
like why can't you just like suck it up? Like just be normal, dude. Like stop being a stop worrying. But I couldn't at all. Um, but yeah, I think how I got to that point specifically was one, helped by a year of isolation with
Yeah.
coronavirus. And I mean, it gave you a lot of time to think about uh, whatever. And in my case, I chose to think about all the negatives in the world. And um, also, I think a bit of sort of imposter syndrome, which is a common phrase these days. Like, do I belong on this team? Like, am I good enough? Without a year of racing, I had to know, like, you kind of forget what you're capable of because you're not competing against people. Like, you're
Yeah.
just training. um, and uh, as I was taking steps that in my eyes were making me a worse cyclist, I was beating myself up for that. I was getting farther from my goals. I felt guilty for being on the team, um, because I had Axel's email box in my mind of all these kids that were more deserving than I was to be there. Uh, and while I never like gave up trying, I was genuinely trying my best. In fact, the hardest I've ever worked in my life was periods of time where I wasn't training at all.
Yeah.
uh, but yeah, it got really bad, and like I was working with a psychologist, and I had all the great perspective in the world from my parents and from people around me, um, teammates, anyone. I was getting a ton of love, and people were willing to talk about things with me, and I was willing to talk, and talking always helped a bit. But I felt doomed. Like I couldn't change my mindset. I was dead set on being miserable. Um, and that didn't change until this June, when finally it got worse enough where it's just clear that I should try something, and started taking antidepressants like medication. And that changed my life like 180, overnight almost. Um, and since then, partially because of the things I worked on while I was extraordinarily down, um, my life is far brighter than I've ever been, than it's ever been. Like I love myself genuinely far more than I ever have. I'm
Fuck
excited
yeah.
for things in the day. Uh, Things don't threaten me. The thought of the thought of anything cycling doesn't scare me. You know what I mean? It's just purely a challenge at this point. And um, to be honest, like on the roads, I didn't have a very good year, right? Like I spent most of it 40 pounds heavier than my race weight,
Which is
which
insane. Yeah, I remember you texted me your weight and you were almost like, "Dude, don't tell anybody this." And
yeah,
I was like, "You're lying. Like this isn't there's no way. Like you almost weigh as much as I do. Like there's no way that you've gotten this." And you couldn't even tell. That was the other thing too. Well, I mean, you could kind of tell, but it wasn't like you didn't look like me, like it was insane. And so when I heard that, like um I was I just couldn't comprehend it.
yeah. I guess you're lucky you didn't see me in person at the time, because uh, I'm laughing at myself like, oh, don't tell people, because anyone that would have laid eyes on me in person would it like it was very glaring. Um, but uh, yeah, like I wasn't training. I was very unfit. I was living in Girona, and I was just going from shop to shop, like binge eating. Medicating with food was basically what I was doing.
Wow.
Um, and you can get into the science of that, but basically, my case, like the little hit of dopamine, but mostly serotonin that I was getting from food was like the only thing that made me feel something. And while I was miserable doing it, and I knew I shouldn't have been doing it, and I hated myself for it, chemically felt great, right? Like I'm sure it's no different than any other addiction.
Yeah.
And so I was eating a bunch, like I said, put on a bunch of weight. Then my life turned around in June, and all of a sudden I was sort of free to fly. Unfortunately, I was still 40 pounds overweight and unfit, and naturally that takes time to correct. And I've made a ton of progress since then. Like physiologically, I'm easily the best I've ever been today. Or well, I've just taken a little break, so probably not that fit right now. But I made a ton of progress. It is the first time in my life where I've had consecutive months of good training without these huge dips from in hindsight what was like mental health. Um, I still have like weight to lose. Obviously, 40 pounds doesn't come off overnight, especially if you want to do it sort of smartly. But basically, the result of that was I didn't have any results on the road. And so, in my case, like I'm too old for action next year. And um, for the time being, while I'm working on it, and there's some things I look up, right now, I don't have a road team for next year.
Oh wow.
And
I'm
all
finding
of
this
that,
out on the podcast too. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. That's why I'm supremely grateful for the 100 million that you donated
Yeah, yeah.
for
No,
this podcast.
yeah, yeah. We took out a small
Uh,
loan. It's cool. It's no
yeah,
big deal.
yeah,
We're a big
just
company.
small. Coffee and man chats.
Yeah, I mean that's why you're live in studio right now. So it's
Exactly.
big, big company.
But I go through all that. I tell you that I've had a bad year. Um, to basically, this is an affirmation for myself. But sitting here today, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of not having like my dream contract or my road program like in this shining light of gold, because I sit here today with way more confidence than I've ever had in myself that I'm actually capable of what I'm trying to do. And if it doesn't work out, like I'm also more okay with that than I've ever been. Um,
Wow.
and it literally it feels like an enlightenment, for lack of a better term, and it's changed my life. And I'm so much better off than I've ever been. And like I said, or like you said, I think I always used to smile. I always used to like joke, and um, but I'm absolutely not someone different, but someone that is able to appreciate how good I have it right now.
Yeah, maybe it's not so much of a mask. Like
Yeah.
you know, because I mean, you hear a lot about that with like, I mean, suicides and stuff like that, and depression, and you hear a lot like everybody's like, we never knew. Like that person was always
Mm,
super stoked. Like that person was always super happy. I mean, I remember when you reached out to me. I don't know, it was like May or something like that, and like honestly, that was when I was starting to feel like you're feeling. You know, I was like,
mm,
I'm in the best place I've ever been. Like, you know, like, yeah, I don't have a national team. Yeah, I don't have a team. Like, but I have this podcast. I have myself. Like, I have my wife. I have, you know, I have a goal, like a thing that I'm chasing. Like, I'm going to give it one more good crack. And, you know, and then you reached out to me and, like, I'm not going to lie, like, part of like the shitty dude in me was like, man, this kid's bitching about living in Girona, racing for action. Like I have just gotten over, you know, being content with myself of like I'm not getting paid. I'm not, you know, I'm not at the highest level that I think I deserve to be at and where I want to be at. And it's like, oh, I haven't gotten the opportunity. And it's like it's interesting, you know, they say don't meet your heroes, and it always dives back to I always dive back to like some people that I've ridden with in the past, that I looked up to and that I actually did 6 days with. And you know, I always like when I was your age, I would always be like, man, I wish I was that guy. And then you meet him, you get to know him, and then you realize like that guy has the same issues that I have, just on a grander, different scale. You
yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
you've probably seen some of that even at a younger age when you were like, I want to go to the Olympics for skiing, and then you meet these Olympians who get comfortable around you, and you're like, oh, well, I don't want to be like that. Like I don't want to have those feelings. Like yeah, I would love to go to the Olympics, but you seem pretty bummed, dude. Um, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, totally. Well, um, I mean, to me, like that's actually the coolest part of what we're doing is I think it's an opportunity to sort of sort it out and learn that like really it's all a joke, right? Like we we ride bikes. Um, we might think we do it for some other reason, but it's most fulfilling when we do it for us and no one else, right? Like
Exactly.
we're
Yeah.
not like to put it bluntly, like we're not saving lives. You know what I mean? Like
No,
I guess maybe you could eventually get good enough that you could make some real change in the world, but there's probably easier and more effective ways to make that change than to dedicate your life to cycling. You know what I mean?
for sure.
Um, and that's not to say that it's not valid. Like I'm 100% committed to being the best cyclist I can, regardless of the result. And I think that's totally valid, but it's only valid because I want to, and that's it. It's simply a game we play, and that's the same with skiing. It's the same with the Olympians that I skied with, or with the world champions I skied with. It's the same with the cyclists that we ride with, like the world champions, the Tour de France champions. Like it's just a game we play at the end of the day. And um, once it becomes something far more than that, then I think you're missing out. Um, and unfortunately, I think that's the case for a lot of people. I think it's really hard for people to sort of live in this, having this perspective that what you're doing is great because that's what you want to do and that's it. Um, and unfortunately, I think it's something that, like, even I, as I sit here feeling great about the world, I will also have a period where that doesn't feel right.
For
And
sure, for sure. And I mean, we're on this podcast, and we're kind of giving it to the man of depression and pretty much saying fuck you, but we're going to sign off here in 30 minutes or so, and something's going to pop up, or that team contract that you thought was going to come through doesn't come through or whatever. And so it happens. And so that being said, like you made a comment that you have no team like for next year for on the road. What is your goal? Like if like I'm team director, what is your goals for next year? Are you like trying to allot to whatever you can get, or like, I mean, from the sounds of it, it sounds like you're looking out for Colby right now. And so, what
yeah,
does Colby want to do?
well, I was fortunate enough to do a bunch of track racing this fall, and uh, it reminded me once again, because I wish I would have caught on to this earlier. But every time I step off the track, I'm like stoked. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that says a lot. And the Olympic qualification cycle will already start next year. And so my main project for the time being is to to qualify for the Olympics on the track. But like I said, I do love the tour, or I do love road cycling, and like long term, the Tour de France is like one of my goals, and like I got to race in Belgium a fair amount this year, and I really like that style of riding, and I think like racing the classics in the spring would be so cool, and something that would suit me if I could do it enough to get good at it. You know what I mean? But I also realized that, and I had this experience this year, that if you don't belong, it's certainly not a place you want to be. Like, I don't want to be world tour because it's cool to be world tour. I only want to be world tour because I'm good enough to be world tour. Um, and I have the belief that if I become good enough, uh, then it will work out. Then I will find my way there. If I deserve to be there, I'll find my way there, and it will be awesome because I belong there, and that's something I know I want to do. But if it's something where I'm like teetering on the edge, and like, oh, like I kind of luck into a contract because of this result or something, uh, I I can say from experience that will probably be a pretty miserable experience. And
yeah.
so,
Well, we've kind
yeah,
of seen that with some people, and you and I know people who have entered the world tour and be like, dude, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And you're pretty much just hanging on for dear fucking life, at every race that you do. And yeah, it's intense. And it's especially like if you're given a job to ride the front all day, for
yeah,
10, 15,
totally,
20 days,
totally. And I mean, if that's like the level I get to, then great. Like I'm all for being that guy, but I want to be that guy because like that's something that I'm good at,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
because uh not because some other reason of the way that I got there. And yeah, that's again just going back to the experience I had this year. In hindsight, in if I feel like I do now, and the progress I made, I now know that I was good enough to be on action, though I never had a road result with them that would sort of suggest that. But I know from the beginning of that experience, when I'm laying in bed, not riding and eating a lot, and miserable, that in that case, I'm not fit enough or like capable enough of a human to be on any cycling team. And that was, it certainly, while that wasn't the cause of my issues, it certainly wasn't helping, knowing, like, having this guilt of like, oh, you don't belong here. That voice was hard to get rid of, and certainly not worth any prestige of riding around with World Tour kit on. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I said, man. I mean, I feel like people are listening to this podcast and now understand what I mean by like you're wise beyond your years, my friend. Because what are you like? You're like 24, right? No.
22.
See, I told you.
I'm
See, I'm always,
feeling
I'm always, I'm
22.
always 2 years ahead. So Gav's 24. Then I'm 28. Man, it's crazy to know. Like it's really crazy to know where we all met and where we all started. Like
Hmm.
I think I came into the program, your age when it first started, and that was the first ever rendition of a men's endurance program that I knew about when I started cycling. But anyways, so that all being said, what's the rest of your year look like, man? Like, you packing up, traveling, you going anywhere, you racing anywhere? What's the deal with you?
I'm packing up. I'm
Yeah,
on the road again. No, well, like I said, I'm on a little bit of a break right now. I'll start training specifically here pretty soon, which I'm super excited for, which is great. It's a cool feeling to be rearing to go. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Which is a good sign. I'm gonna race the track as much as I can this winter. It's a little bit hard to kind of sort it out
yeah,
because
for
there's
sure.
not a ton of racing going on, and it's hard to get into races. But I have my schedule through December. I'll go over and I'll race in Europe some, which I'm really excited about. And then, yeah, like I said, I'm talking to some road teams, and that will obviously shape kind of what next year looks like for me specifically. But in general, like I said, I'm I'm committed to this track project, and I'm really excited about it. And I love racing the track, and so that alone will make it a worthwhile experience to like kind of go all in on this thing. And so,
Yeah, and we'll
uh,
take this one sound clip right here, and we'll post it in 2024, um, when you're at the
yeah,
Olympics in Paris.
yeah,
You know,
yeah, exactly.
I might have to pay another 100 million or whatever it was to get you on the first time to
I
share
think
it.
it was in our contract that you could
But
use sound clips for
oh,
100
okay.
million.
Sick, 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 sick.
Yeah.
Nice, 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 nice. Well, cool, man. Well, one question though before I let you roll. It's our classic question, and I know you've listened to the podcast a few times, but I bet you didn't take the time to think about this question. But if you could have a cup of coffee with one individual, who would that individual be, dead or alive? How would you take your coffee, and why would you have a cup of coffee with that individual?
I want to tell this story really quick. It's funny to me, um, and Pruma will laugh as well. When you first started this, just because you mentioned that I listen to the podcast, which I do. Uh,
Shit.
well, I do. But the reason why this is funny is because I texted you one time. I was like, man, like you're doing a really good job with the podcast. And that was purely on me, like seeing your social media presence, like seeing that you had a microphone and headphones, and like just hearing little clips on your stories and stuff. And I could tell like the quality of the sound and everything was quite good. And I was like, yeah, like I just wanted to show some love, and I told you, like, man, like you're doing a good job. And to be fair, I had listened to one podcast. I had listened to TJ Eisenhart.
Yeah.
Um, but you're like, oh yeah, like thanks, I appreciate it, man. Which one's your favorite? I'm like, oh yeah, the one with Dan Bigham. And you're like, oh well, that one hasn't been released yet. And so yeah, you caught me
Oh
red-handed.
yeah, because I pretty much I released like a little clip, and I think I was releasing it in like 2 weeks, and you
Yeah.
responded off the Dan Bigham thing, and I was like, well, I haven't released that podcast yet, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
It was
it's no,
well.
it's fine. It's really funny because it's like and it, I don't know who my listeners are because like I have analytics and I look at all the analytics and people listen. Like I see it. Like we got on the Out of Bounds network like through listenership and um. But whenever I talk to my friends, they're just like, "Yeah, no, I don't. No, I don't listen to it at all." I'm not sorry, and it's no hard feelings. I get it. I mean, actually, I got made fun of and lost some friends over the podcast because I got bashed on so hard because it's annoying, which I understand. It's not like I'm turning into a fitness blogger or something. I'm just trying to have fun on a podcast, man. But anyways, now that you're an avid listener and supporter of the podcast, and you
Yes.
know you're what is it? I haven't gotten like a dumb name for my listeners yet. Like you know how people like call each other like I don't know like coffee heads or some shit.
Yeah,
I haven't done that yet, and I don't think I'll ever get there. But now that you're a coffee head, you can have a
yeah.
cup of coffee with one individual. You know who would that be, man? Dead or alive? And how would you take your coffee?
Well, my snap reaction is LeBron James because he's a stud. Uh,
Yeah.
and no more than that. My next snap reaction is Lewis Hamilton because he's a stud. Um, but if I thought about it more, dead or alive, one person, A coffee date is probably not that long. So who am I going to get the most
Well, here's the thing.
bang for buck?
This cracks me every time. This is the 80th episode of a podcast that I've done. And people are always like, they resort it back to the coffee, and they go, yeah, I guess if we're having a coffee, it's probably only going to be like 20 minutes. Or if we're going to have a coffee, it's going to be an hour. Or, this person won't drink coffee. And so maybe I need to switch this up a little bit, because it's finally clicked with me that people really looked more deep into the coffee than the actual part of the question that I want them to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
But it can be as long as you want, man. I mean, I'm literally saying that you can bring a dead guy back to life.
yeah. Well, if I got endless time, there's this girl named Byron Katie, and
Okay.
she basically uh, has devoted her life to helping people with their silly problems, which I'm calling my problems silly. But yeah, basically helping people with depression, and she has this incredible background, like very dark and not not pleasant, and she lives this incredibly happy life because of basically the lessons she's taught herself, and she teaches that to other people. I think you could learn a lot if you spend a bunch of time with her. um how I take my coffee, this is going to get the episode canceled, but I've had 3 cups of coffee in my life,
Oh,
one
that's right.
mocha
That's
and
right.
2 black decaf coffees. And
So
so
coffee creamer it is.
I think just a few coffee creamers
So
raw.
Colby has a party trick, and that's why we're laughing. He puts a coffee creamer in his mouth, like a little coffee creamer cup, and he pops it with his teeth. And for whatever reason, we have made that out to be a party trick. If that tells you how exciting our track camps are, because now that I'm saying this aloud, I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not that exciting. But I remember we used to get really fucking excited when you would put a coffee
it's,
creamer in your
it's very exciting, and I challenge anyone to give it a try. You have to get the right one. Some of them don't make the pop, but it will shock you. It will rock your world. And yeah, it's my vice. Coffee creamer is my vice.
Okay, so a couple coffee creamers, and then she might end up giving you more advice because she realizes you have
Yeah,
more than one silly problem.
I
Um,
have. Yeah.
but anyways, guys, thanks so much for coming back and listening to the podcast. And now that we have a new listener, Colby Lange, he will probably listen to this podcast episode too. I'll put a link to his social media down in the description below. Also, all the Out of Bounds and my podcast stuff all down in the description below, the sponsors of this episode. Other than that, we'll see you next time. We're out.